The rest, obviously, is in the paper, especially the 10 issues, and we agree with Dr. Uchodo on what the issues are very clearly. Ambassador, you've seen the issues. They are very deep. The first issue has to do with what Mule was speaking about. We cannot run away from the way elections are conducted in this country. That has to be number one. Even the idea of discussing about completing this electoral process should be left on the table. Let us not go to the dialogue with set up minds. And there are those who are saying, if the presidential election is not the agenda, there's no dialogue. That's why I told you, don't take the issues ahead of the format. Begin with setting up the dialogue and then bring the issues. I'm suggesting that some of these issues are there. They are very deep. I don't want to front-load them. They are in the paper. But elections and all these other things of devolution that you've spoken about, national cohesion and healing, institutions and how they work, corruption and impunity, unemployment, economic inclusivity, etc., security sector reforms, they are all there. These issues are in the APRM NEPAD report of 2006. They are there in the Kofi Annan National Dialogue report. They are in the TJRC. All these issues are there. So we are not picking them from the air, they are there, and we are just rephrasing them so that they are structured and everybody understands what we are fighting about. So, Ambassador, I want to conclude with the story of John Kufuor, the former president of Ghana. In 2010, during the Kofi Annan series of talks, I was one of the key speakers at Crown Plaza. And John Kufuor was there. And of course, Dr. Kofi Annan. And after I presented, John Kufuor waited for me at the door as we were going for tea. And he grabbed my hand and he took me to the table. And he said, you made a very good presentation. But your problem is that you do not have the language to give the scene its name. So I asked him, what's the name of the scene? He told me, your Kenyan problem is conflict of interest. Your problem is conflict of interest. People rig power so that they can use power to give themselves tenders and therefore expand their businesses and leave everybody out of the conversation. That's why elections are so contested. And unfortunately in Kenya, these people who have been at the top happen to come from only two communities. So then, the conflict of interest is so clear. And that conflict of interest has now gone to the county governments. That is why I'm requesting that this time round, let us not go to the shower to only wash our faces, then change clothes and put on new suits, but we have actually not bathed. Let us have an honest dialogue and let us get to the bottom of the issues. Thank you so much and God bless you.
What I was not clear is this fear of shredding the country if we went to the third scenario. I think shredding the country means that Kenya as a state then disintegrates. This is my understanding. I am not clear myself, Mheshimiwa, that we understand the meaning of a state and whether we want a state. Because who wants a state? Where do we want a state? Call Kenya. If it disintegrates, so what? Why are we fearing that the Kenya state will disintegrate? This is the answer I want from Shuford. Who wants the state and why?
Julius has been telling me that the crisis is superficial sometimes, and I'm saying, no, it's real and it's a creation. Can I get the young lady from behind and then end up with the elders here, please? Yeah, come to the mic, please. Yeah. I'm encouraged because hii future sisi tumeshakula hii mambo yote.
Thank you, because I think it was also a discussion with the older people when we were locked out. So we smelled some fire somewhere and we found ourselves here. So it is good. But I think for me, my concern, and I've listened to the two scenarios, is who calls the dialogue? Because I'm in a state where I feel like even as we're having this conversation, it is just a conversation amongst ourselves. It's not making someone have a sleepless night. It's like we're talking to ourselves. How do we shake the status quo, whether it is both from the NASA side or the Jubilee side, that is making life very uncomfortable for Kenya? Who calls the shots in this case? Because you had like President Uhuru saying, I will wait until, and then I can then invite. On the other side, I'm not going to wait. We need to. So how do we get to that level playing ground? The second thing for me was the issue of the national conference, which I agree, but I think we're also in a country where if I don't participate, I don't think my issue has been addressed. So I think that's also the number one conflict. If Susan is not part of that meeting, then what are you discussing? If I am from Karachoni, and we all can't meet, 40,000 people can't meet in one place, so we must have representatives. So how do we address that number one problem that we have in Kenya, where we all feel like we have a right to participate? And the second thing is, I find a conflict when we have too many agendas. While I agree we have many issues that are ailing us as a country, I think for me, what is ailing us more is that there's no electoral justice at the moment, which is making, I think, everyone feel uncomfortable. So economic empowerment might be a good agenda for the country, but I'm not sure we can be able to deal with that in the number one during the first dialogue meeting. Perhaps maybe we just deal with one in a smart way, and then we can leave the rest for another time. I don't know, but so I'm struggling with that when you want to address all of them at the same time, but again, you still want to hammer what is
the priority.
Is that when you are scheduling dialogue, you have to schedule things into three. You will have to discuss of what has to be dealt with immediately, to even allow and unlock a conversation into the short term, and create the goodwill and the momentum to address the long-term issues. So when we talk about 10 issues, those have been clustered into those three categories. Electoral justice has to be sorted out immediately. Issues of excessive use of force, killing of people, etc., civil liberties, there are things that are immediate. There are things that are short-term. People have to agree how governance is going to be carried on as a country. How are we going to govern ourselves using the various instruments and tools? There are issues that have not been dealt with. For example, people refusing to implement the Constitution on areas, for example, on the 2/3 gender rule. These are immediate things of governance, short-term, that need to be resolved, because there are even court cases around this. And then there are the long-term issues that can only be done if there is a stabilized and consensual governance. Issues of young people's unemployment. Your Excellency, we are dealing with a country of nearly 12.5 million unemployed adults. Those young people who do not fear to be killed with police guns, I meet them, I go out to meet them, and they tell you, we were going to Canaan, where we are going to find employment. But these people have stolen it again. Let the police come and kill us. How many of us can they kill? Anywhere you call a meeting in this country, you will have 5,000 to 10,000 people attending, whether you're in Meru or somewhere in Migori or somewhere in Ukambani. That is how bad. 12.5 million adults unemployed. We are dealing with a major crisis as a country. So, Susan, you will need to schedule the dialogue to address the immediate priority issues, which lead to governance issues in the short term, and then create a stable system which can handle the big issues of cohesion, unemployment, etc., institutional efficacy. Bishop, I like your focus and the way you don't like being distracted by side shows. The courage that you have, I wish it was in the religious leaders. A lot of your brothers don't have it. And that's what I was telling the bishops in Nakuru. The bishops and the religious leaders in this country are not courageous. They are not courageous. They are supposed to be the conscience of the nation, but they are not. But they are not, because most of them have already been captured. A lot of your brothers are actually pushing for ethnic agenda. That's the unfortunate situation. So that is where we are, and that's why they could not agree with you to face President Uhuru, because President Uhuru had sent a message and he said he doesn't want anybody who is saying that the October 26 election does not go on. So there's no courage. And that speaks to what Mule was saying, that our country's problem is not just political or economic, but it's also moral. We have a deep moral crisis in this country. So Mumbi, the narrative you are speaking about is what we call the factors that drive scenarios. And there are always actors in the scenarios. And I'm combining this with the Ambassador Julius Okara's in terms of what was not clear in my presentation about scenario 3, who wants the state? The truth of the matter, from a political science standpoint, is that the nation-building project collapsed in 1969. After Tom Mboya's killing, the Kenyan nation-building project collapsed. All things started, Ambassador Getau, you are aware of this, all things started, ethnicization of the state, everything else took over after that. You cannot talk about state building if you have not completed nation building, which is agreement on what our values commonly are. So if you don't have a nation, you can't build institutions on top of a broken nation. Institution systems and processes, that's the state. You need to build a nation, a consensus around values, including human life, etc., etc. So, Ambassador, who wants the state? Because the state in this country is a state that has been brutalizing people. It's a state that has been stealing taxes. It's the state that has been violating human rights. The group which feels that this state is against them don't want it. The people who have been taking advantage, privatizing taxes, as retired President John Kufuor was saying, want this state the way it is, because it's a good state. It's a good state. They use it to privatize billions of taxes. They have built industries and they have built real estate all over this country, etc. They have invested abroad, and the rest of the money is in stock exchanges. So this is a good state for them. They want it to remain as is. So there is a conflict about who wants the state and who does not want it. It is clear, as I said, positions are taken depending on interests. So those who benefit from the current state want the state as it is. Those who do not want the state because it brutalizes them and kills them and excludes them don't want the state. So in terms of scenarios, Mheshimiwa Mumbi, we must manage this thing without emotions and without attachment to our political parties and to our affiliations as ethnic communities, because the late Cardinal Tunga, remember, used to say that you cannot help the Bukusu using outsiders. It is a Bukusu who can actually create an intra-Bukusu conversation. What is wrong about us, the Bukusus? What is good about us? What is good about us, Kisis? What is wrong about us, Kisis? You cannot build a nation unless the constituents of the nation actually step back and have an intra-ethnic dialogue. We Kikuyus, what is not right about how we engage with the rest? But what is it that we bring to the table which is part of the Kenyan national value? That's how you build a nation. So we have to be honest, and we have to summon the courage to look at ourselves And this time around, what I'm saying is that we must remove the clothes and take the bath.
I've heard a lot of the things that are being said here, but I want to say this, especially now from the women's rights perspective, that this is a scenario that we had warned about, because the first step towards entrenching impunity that has now gained currency as a way of doing things in Kenya is the impunity that we see in a political leadership that refuses to be fettered within the confines of the law. We are talking about reviewing the Constitution and opening it up. It is the same Constitution that our politicians have refused to implement, particularly with regard to the two-thirds gender principle. And when I talk about the two-thirds gender principle, I think all of you know me, because there's nowhere I haven't been talking about the two-thirds gender principle. We have sued. The parliament is in contempt of court orders. It was to be disbanded. The cabinet, we sued the president. The judiciary has affirmed and reaffirmed this. And every time we said to Kenyans, for as long as you allow them to be okay with violating the two-thirds principle to exclude over half of the population, because remember that women are over 52%, they are 52% of the population. And for as long as we are comfortable with allowing our political class to exclude over half of the population in leadership and decision-making and its attendant ripple effects, then at what point does it become convenient or inconvenient for them to then ignore other sections of the Constitution? And one of the issues we kept on talking about is, at what point does it become inconvenient for us to have free and fair elections? Because the two-thirds gender principle is a key component of the electoral principle. Article 81 enshrines the principles that the electoral process must comply with, must. Among them is not more than two-thirds of the same gender. This has been ignored. The inclusion of persons with a disability, this has been ignored. So if we were to take the law at face value, then the entire electoral process ought to be nullified, because it has violated the basic principles of the Constitution, which requires that these be key components: the inclusion of women, the inclusion of persons with disability, alongside free and fair elections that are credible, transparent, free from intimidation, free from violence, easily verifiable. So we center ourselves on free, fair, credible, but we forget that you should have not more than two-thirds of the same gender. We forget that we should have persons with a disability. And then we still talk about electoral justice, because the electoral injustice has been meted out not just on the political class, but also on an entire cadre of people, youth, persons with disability, and women, who have been unable to access political power. And you know what political power means in Kenya? It is access to the power of budget making, policy, legislation, all those things, decisions about how the national cake is divided. So when we're having this conversation about reviewing the Constitution, because the political class at the highest level, the male cadre, have failed in some way to come to some consensus or to some agreement, then the question then becomes, what exactly are we envisioning when we talk about electoral justice? Because it is not just about the fraud that is perpetuated, because that in itself is a problem of the moral character of this country. And I think Reverend Bishop Adoyo, spoke very well this morning. Kenya has lost her soul as a country. Because when we talk about electoral fraud, we have brought in technology, but technology is only as good as the people who operate it. And we have seen that Kenyans at the lowest level are willing to be compromised. Martha stood here and talked about party primaries. We have all seen how shambolic they are. So we must look at, when we're talking about electoral justice, we must look at political party management. How are the political parties operating? Because the fraud begins there. And once we allow fraud at that small level, then it simply carries over to the national level, to our general elections, and at the end of the day, we see it also manifesting in the way we are governed. Kenya is in a crisis, even if people don't want to accept it. Maybe people don't want to see the crisis in the context of the political crisis, but we are also in the throes of an economic crisis because of the mismanagement and fraud that we have perpetuated in our country. We have allowed our leaders to get away with stealing from Kenyan people, and we have said nothing about it. So I think that as we have this discussion, it is important that we identify what this problem is, because we cannot continue to gloss over the cankerous wound that is festering in this country. So we must address the issue of our national values, because to say that we are going to discuss positions, as was suggested by the NCCK, that we expand the national when we have already devolved power, and we have created new centers of exclusion at the devolved unit simply because we have cascaded the bad manners, as Mule called it, down to the county level. We have a problem. And this problem is only being seen in one context. For us as women, we are looking at what the promise of the new constitution was, because with its challenges, the new constitution actually holds a promise of being able to address several of the challenges that we face. Among them is this exclusion conundrum, because one of the national values and principles of governance is inclusivity, and we have the articles that guarantee our inclusivity. For instance, the 2/3 gender principle. By guaranteeing inclusion into leadership in all spheres, addressing the political marginalization of women. Policies and programs aimed at addressing the marginalization, economic marginalization and cultural marginalization. When we talk about the land issue in Kenya, we know we have tried to make recommendations to community land, because we know that land as a factor of production, because of cultural systems that have kept women out of owning land, women continue to be the face of poverty. Even at that level, we have been unable to influence community land boards and the community land laws to guarantee the inclusion of women, because there are still those systems that say community land is ancestral land and therefore belongs to the men and to the tribe. And the tribes are patriarchal in nature. So we are talking about several issues that, of course, need to be discussed in a wider range. So for us, these talks, one, we must talk about, before we talk about even amending the Constitution, we must talk about implementing the Constitution. I fear that in Kenya, every problem that we have, we throw the law at it. Kenya, we have enough laws. Actually, we don't need more laws. In fact, if you recall, one of the biggest complaints that people have about Kenya is that Kenya has excellent policies, excellent laws that have been carried over into other countries and successfully implemented. When you look at places like Rwanda, when we talk about Rwanda, and I'm not looking at everything else that is happening in Rwanda, but let's talk about women's empowerment. We all know that one of Kagame's chief advisor on gender was a Kenyan, Dr. Okacha Bagi, for 10 years. He advised him. Dr. Okacha Bagi is the one who taught us about gender, you know. They actually borrowed Kenya's policies and fully implemented them. Rwanda is #1 in the world. Malawi on food security borrowed a program, a project. ICT. Dr. Ochodo here. He's renowned in the region, but in Kenya, we don't listen to him. So we don't have a problem with our laws. We have a problem with implementing the laws. We have a problem with inclusion, and this inclusion particularly around women. The religious leaders, even among your cadre. Yes, we have the gender justice movement that is really trying to bring the religious group into seeing how women can be included. But even when we look around here, How many women are called in? How many times are we called? We are always the footnote in the meeting. We are. We are the ones to speak last when everybody is tired and everything has been said. It is true. It is true. This is how we take